So we're back with hour 2. We've done our simple weather widget API. Not quite formatted how we want, but it is functional. So we want to add Recaptcha. So Recaptcha is another API that's owned by Google. Google didn't create it. It was originally created by a couple professors at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. So what we want is to add CAPTCHA. We've all seen them as end users. We've all filled millions of them out. We want to add it to our form. So first thing we need to do is we need to go and we need to find Recaptcha. So we're going to go to google.com/Recaptcha. And they've gone through several different iterations of this. So there is an older version. Version 1 of their API is still out there. In version 1 of the API, we usually got text that was very hard to read, and we had to try to copy that text. The newer version is much easier. Most of the time, we just check a box, and occasionally we get prompted with some pictures, and it will say something. It'll show us, say, 9 pictures and say, click on all the pictures that have trees, for example. We'll get that occasionally as well. So what we need to do is we need to go into their documentation, figure out how to use it. We might have to sign up for a key. Many APIs will force us to sign up and create a key so that the owners of the API know who's using it. Excuse me. I've already done that part for you. So I'm going to click on Get Recaptcha. Now I'm logged into my Google account. So the first step here says manage your Recaptcha API keys. So for every website, for every domain we use Recaptcha on, Google's asking us to register that domain so that they know. So you can either generate your own key, but you don't need to because I've already generated a key to run on the computer studies domain, which we all share. And those key values are here on Blackboard. So you can generate your own if you want, but it's not necessary. We can all use the keys. So here are the Recaptcha keys I've already generated for the computer studies domain. This is the public or the site key. This will go into our registration form and it will be visible in the source of our page. And this is our secret key, which will embed into our save page. We'll need that key when we send the user's response to Google. And Google will tell us whether the CAPTCHA is successful or unsuccessful. So if you want to create your own keys, if you were building another website, here where it says register a new site, you could just give it a descriptive name and you would put in the domain name. Recaptcha always runs by default on localhost. It just writes a little red mark underneath it saying this is running on localhost. If we do that, okay? You'll see that on mine today, but it will still work. So you can set up your keys, but you do need a Google account. You don't have to do this. You can skip this step because I've already done it. So the next thing is to go to the resources section. And if we're going to use an API, we need to learn how it works and how do we call or consume this API. So I'll click version, which still runs. They actually give us, I'll click on, they give us a full PHP code sample with all the PHP code we need, which is great. You basically, here it says, you download their Recaptcha PHP file. You call require once to include the file. You print out your public key and they show you right here. Here you paste in the PHP code and that generates the CAPTCHA on our form. That's part 1. And then part 2 on the server on our page, our action page, here's all the PHP code that invokes the API and will return the response to us. For some bizarre reason, the current version of the API, which has been out for at least a year, nobody's actually written the PHP documentation. No one's created a code sample of how to do this in PHP. So we're going to do it ourselves. I'm going to walk you through it. That would be a good thing for someone to do. Document it and send it to Google. Say, here you go. You guys really need to update your API documentation. And here's a PHP code sample you can use. So we go to getting started for version 2. So it tells us we need an API key pair. So that's the site key and the secret key. So that was that previous page. You either created your own or you're just going to use the keys I've generated that are on Blackboard. That's easier. And by default, they'll always work on localhost or 127.0.0.1. So the first step, the next thing we need to do is learn on our form, how do we actually get the CAPTCHA to show up? Where should it go? Here's our register page. Where on this page should we show the CAPTCHA? Wolfgar, what do you think? Okay, I like that suggestion. Were you going to say the same? So before our register, we'll grab some of the code from Google's documentation and we'll paste it in. So it says we can automatically or explicitly render it. We're going to do the automatic rendering, which is easier. So the easiest way, it says, is link to their JavaScript file and then add a Recaptcha tag inside of a div element. Well, that seems pretty easy. So here's their source, google.com/recaptcha/api.js. I'm going to grab that file, grab that link, and copy it. So to get here, I'm on developers.google.com/recaptcha/docs. And then I clicked on displaying the widget. And that takes me here. So I'm going to copy this line that's highlighted in blue. This will give me a link to the Google Recaptcha JavaScript. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to open up my register.php page. And down at the bottom, after my form, but before my footer, I'll paste that in. So now my register page can use the Google API. Step 2 is we now need, before our button, we need a div tag, and I'll copy the code from the docs, a div tag that will actually generate that CAPTCHA code. So right here, in their sample code, where it says div class equals G Recaptcha data dash site key equals your site key, I want to copy that line and paste it into my form where Wolfgar suggested, underneath my confirm box, but above my register, like the div that holds my register button. So I'm going to copy that. I'll put in a blank line before my last div. And I will paste in a Recaptcha div. So that goes right here. So I've added line 20 and line 27. Both of those were copied and pasted straight from Google's documentation. If I go and load my form right now, why do I get this message? And how do I fix it? Matt? Yeah, I didn't, where it says your site key, that's where I need to go to Blackboard and grab that value. So I already set up a site key for computer studies. So you want this value, the second one that says site key, not the secret key. So I'm going to copy that value to my clipboard. I'll go back to my form, and where it says your site key, I'll paste in this value. So right here it says your site key. I'll take that out. I'll paste in the site key I generated on Google. Now, I get this message saying it's running on localhost. If I upload it to DreamHost, that error is going to go away. That little warning will go away. So long as I'm uploading it to the computer studies domain. If you have your own domain and you upload it there, you're going to get invalid site key because this key is for localhost and computerstudy.es only. Now, it doesn't do anything yet. It generates the little widget, but there's still no checking on the next page. If I fill out the form and don't check the box, it's still going to sign me up. So this was the easy part. Displaying the widget was the simple part. The hard part is that we have to write all the code on our save page, and this is all the code that Google should have documented for us, but they didn't. They didn't tell us, they didn't give us the PHP code of how to check. So then I'm going to click on this next section, verify the user's response. And let's kind of look at what it tells us. So this will tell us when a CAPTCHA is solved by a user, a new field called G-Recaptcha-response gets added into the HTML by that API JavaScript. So here's what happens. In order to check the CAPTCHA response, we can't do it ourselves. We need to send this value off to Google. We need to send that response off to this URL, google.com/recaptcha/API/site-verify. So that's one of the other parts of their API. The first part generates the widget for us. The second part will check the user's response. And in here, it tells us we have to do a post. So we're going to use a post to that URL. We're going to have to send two values to the API. What two values do you think we need to send Google so that they can send us back a response telling us if the CAPTCHA is okay or not? What two things would they need? Yeah, they need the secret key. So we'll have to include that. What will be the other thing they'll need? Nope, the site key is used to generate the CAPTCHA box on the form. That's the public part of it. Yeah, what was this value right here? The G recaptcha response. So what was the user's response? Did they properly check the box, yes or no? So we send to Google the user's response and the key attached to our domain, and Google's going to send us a response back. We'll look in a minute. We'll see what that response looks like. What do you suppose we might get back from Google? Yeah, what they're going to send us back generally is a true or false. Okay? And if they send us back a false, they'll send something else along with it. What else would we want if we get a false? Yeah, what we'd want is a description if we got a false, why. We want to know why we got false. What was wrong? So we need to talk a little bit about the format. All APIs, there's one pretty typical format used for APIs. There is an old standard and there's a new standard. Does anybody know what the current format is for how the data would be transferred back and forth? You got it. What the heck is JSON? You got it. So JavaScript array. That's the common language now. Whenever we want to talk to another API, or we want to build an API and have other applications send data to us and we send a response, JSON is the standard. When you guys do advanced web programming in the fall working with Node.js, you'll be working with JSON all the time. Even the data in your database is stored as JSON. So it's just a JavaScript array. Now, this is the new standard. Does anybody know what the old standard is?
XML?
Yeah, so XML was the old standard. If we looked, I can actually show you a sample of the difference. Let's go here. We can have a look at two files, the same data, one in XML and one in JSON. Let's see if I have it here.
What made it change from XML to JSON?
Very good question. Anybody want to take a stab at answering that? Why is JSON become the standard now?
XML is very verbose. So it's a lot more verbose than JSON is.
Okay, what do you mean by, you're right. What do you mean by verbose?
You have to write a lot to do very little. Both these are very often auto-generated, but JSON's easier to edit.
Okay, I have a quick example somewhere. I'll see if I can find it. If not, I can find a quick one on Google. So let's look at, actually we can find an image, perhaps. Here, this one's good. Okay. So here's the difference. Here's the same data. On the right, you see it in XML format. In the left, you see it in JSON format. So this is the old way, and this is the new way. So one of the things is XML. Notice here we have an opening person. For every tag, we have it repeated twice. So we have open first name, close first name, open last name, close last name. Okay? So it looks like HTML. The thing is, we're repeating all these words. So the word first name appears in this file twice. In this file, it only appears once. Now, this is a small file, but imagine there's a million records in here, right? Which file is going to be bigger? The XML file is going to be a lot bigger, which means it's going to be slower to transfer for an API. It's also going to use a lot more bandwidth to transfer, so it's going to be more expensive to host that API. Also, because in XML we have the opening and closing tags, the data is harder to read. So this is more human readable. We can write less code to represent the same data. It transfers faster, and it's cheaper because it uses less bandwidth. So this is now the standard. There are still some APIs out there that let you choose. So for example, if you want to get a shipping rate on Canada Post, they have an API where you can send in, it's from this postal code to that postal code and this much weight, how much will it be? And in their API, you can actually say, I want JSON or I want XML. And their API will give you whatever you request. But XML is on the way out, and JSON is now the standard for those reasons. So if we look at what we get, we're going to send a post request to that URL. We're going to pass in our secret key and the user's response. We have the option to send in the user's IP address if we want to be tracking that. If we think we're getting spammed from one IP, we could be logging that IP. And what we get back is a JSON array that looks like this. So it's basically just key value pairs. So the first key is called success. And as Bryce suggested, we're going to get back a true or false. Right? We'll also get back a timestamp, so the date and time of the request. And if we get false, we will also get back an array of error codes. So what we're really interested in, we're going to get back this JSON object. We're going to need to convert that into a PHP array. And then we'll need to evaluate the success value. Is it true or is it false? And that will tell us whether Google said the CAPTCHA is okay or not okay. And then we know whether to save our new user or not. Right? So they've given us the JSON, but what they haven't, and here are the error codes we might get back. So if we don't supply a secret or our secret is invalid, we'll get back this as an error message. You can see the codes here. But we'll need to go through, how do we make a call to that URL? We basically want to do it like a hidden call. We need to send a post here, but we don't want to take the user off to that website. We just want to make a request and see what we get back from Google. So we have a library in PHP that will allow us to make a request out to that URL without changing the URL on our page. It's like a hidden post in the background. So let's open up our save page. And maybe after we're validating the username and password, but before we check if OK is true, let's add our Recaptcha validation. We're going to need about probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or 20 lines of code to get our CAPTCHA checked and then know whether the user's okay or not okay. So the first thing is store the values into variables. I'll create two variables. The first one I'll call secret. What should go in here? Json? No. We're setting up the values we need to send to Google, Matt. Yeah, we're going to need our secret key that's on Blackboard. So when I'm going to grab this secret value here. So when we call Google's API, if we don't supply that key, we're going to get back a missing key error from Google. We have to identify what site is making the request. It's not, can't be anonymous. So I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to create a second variable called response, because I'm just kind of matching what Google has in their API. The parameters are called secret and response in the API, so we'll call our variables secret and response. And our response variable comes from our post collection. The API docs say the Recaptcha generates an HTML field, a hidden field called g-recaptcha-response. So this variable will hold the value whether the user checked the box or didn't. But we don't have the ability to evaluate it. We have to send those values to Google and let Google evaluate them. So our next step is we need to set up an object. PHP has a built-in library called curl. Curl will allow us to make a request to any URL on the internet. We can specify if it's a get or post, and we can pass parameters to it. So I'm going to create a variable, ch, short for curl handler. And we'll call this function, my code editor recognizes, curl init. So let's initialize a new URL handler. We need to add a bunch of options to this. And then we need to include our secret and response values, and eventually we'll execute our curl handler, which will send the data off to Google, and then we'll get a response back, which we can parse out. So we're going to set some options. So there's a function here, curl underscore set opt. We're going to need to call this 3 times, actually 4 times. So the first parameter is what's the curl request, our ch variable. And the first option we want to set, and these are enumerators in PHP, is the URL. What is the URL we're calling? Well, it's HTTPS. This is straight from their documentation. I could copy it from there. Oops. So their API tells us we need to make a request here. We could just copy and paste it from here. That would be easier than typing it. So this is the URL that we're going to send a request to. google.com/recaptcha/API/site-verify. The next option we want to set is this one, curl opt underscore return transfer. Meaning, when we make a request to that URL, are we taking the user in their browser to that page, or are we just doing a hidden request and keeping the user on the current page? So we want to set our return transfer value to true. We're just going to Google in the background. We're not actually taking the user in their browser to Google's page. We're staying on this page. But we're calling Google behind the scenes. The documents also tell us that our method has to be post. So we're going to need to set that up as an option as well, because we could also choose get or put or delete. So it's curl opt post is also true. So what we need to do now, we have 2 variables here, secret and response. We need to create an array in PHP and add those 2 variables to our array. And then we add one more option, which is our post fields, and we pass all of the values we want to send to Google in an array. So create and fill array with our post values. I'm just going to create an empty array. I'll call it post data. And then I want to add in my secret and my response to the array. So we filled our variable here, and now we're adding it into our array here. And this name is very important, where I've highlighted in blue. We can't call this anything we want because the API is looking for a post field called secret, all lowercase. So our array has to have a field called secret, all lowercase. And then we also need to set up a second field in the array called response and fill that with our response variable. Now, we probably don't really need lines 29 and 30. We could just put the variables right here, the values right here, I suppose. That would save us a couple steps. So lines 29 and 30, they're kind of optional. We could just put the values into our array right here. So now we want to call our curl set option function one more time so we can add our array with our two values to our post request. So in effect, instead of us filling out a form, having a user fill out a form in the browser, we're kind of going through the process of populating a form and submitting it with PHP code using curl. We're simulating as if this was a form and a user was putting these things in. We'll call set option one more time with our curl handler. And this time, the option we want to set is our post fields. And now we just pass in our array of two values. So we've set up all of the options for our URL request. Nothing's happened at this point, though. We still haven't actually sent anything to Google. So now we need to execute this request. And when we make this request, Google's going to send us back a JSON object with a success value of true, false, and then some other fields which we're really not that interested in. We really just are interested in that success value, true or false. Did the captcha work? So we'll execute the API call. Store the result. Any questions about what we're done so far?
This is called SOAP, right? The general protocol that we're using?
No, SOAP is generally used. SOAP is old. It's generally used with XML. This would be, we're using REST here. Okay, because we're, sorry?
How much is REST again?
Typically, JSON APIs use REST, and SOAP APIs, which are older, tend to use XML. I won't go into the differences are a bit beyond the scope of the lesson to talk about how REST and SOAP are different, but most APIs now are REST.
So, sorry, my question may be too vague. I was just asking is like, isn't the code we doing some line is called REST, or is some name of the process? Just trying to understand that.
REST is typically defined by, in SOAP APIs, the developer creates the names of the functions you can call as the consumer. In REST APIs, there's basically 5 function names. There's POST, which is done for adding data. There's GET, which is done for retrieving data. There's PUT, which is done for updating, and there's DELETE, which is self-explanatory. So when you see API methods with the names POST, GET, PUT, and DELETE, those are typically REST APIs. So I'm going to create a variable called result. And the function we want to call here is displayed in my pop-up menu. What do you suppose the function is we want to call? Good guess. It's not curl get info. It's one of the others. Yeah, we want to call curl exec. So we've set up our curl request. We've populated the data. We've set up the URL. We've said it's a post. Now we want to execute that request. And the parameters, okay, what's the variable that represents your curl request? So that's our ch variable that we've been using. So this actually executes, sends that post request off to Google, sends our values along with it, and stores whatever we get back in our $result. We can't just print out $result. It's not a string. It's not an array. It's a JSON object. So here's what I'm going to try for now. I'll just say echo $result. And just for now, I'm going to say OK equals false. I don't want to save a new user. I just want to see where we're at so far. So after we execute it, we're going to print the result. We'll say OK is false so nothing else happens. Let's try it, see what we get when we try filling this out and sending to Google. So I'll fill out my page. If I leave this unchecked, interesting, got nothing, we'll try that again. But notice it didn't print anything out. So it's not a string, we just have an object here. Now we can close our curl request. We don't need it anymore because we have this $result object, this JSON object. So I'm going to close my request by calling curl close. So now what we need to do is we need to convert this. It's in JSON, we need to convert it to an array. So PHP and because JSON is so widely used now, pretty much any programming language has a built-in method for reading and writing JSON. PHP is no exception. So PHP has methods where we can take a PHP array and convert it to a JSON object. It has a method where we can take a JSON object and convert it to a PHP array with one line of code. So that's what we need to do. So we'll convert response object JSON to a PHP array. So I'll create an array called result array. You can see the functions that PHP has. JSON decode, JSON encode, JSON get last error, all the things that are here, as well as from and to JSON. So we want this one, the JSON decode method. Take a JSON object and translate it into an array. So we're going to take our result and decode it from JSON. So we're converting from JSON to a PHP array. If you're working in Java, there'll be functions for converting to and from JSON. If you're working in C#, there'll be functions. Pretty much every language supports this now. So now we have a regular PHP array, and in there we're going to have a couple of values. Actually, we'll have 4 values. We're going to have values called success, challenge, TS, hostname, and error codes. We're really only interested in the value called success. So we'll say if our result array, if the success field is equal to false, what should we do? Take those lines out. So what should happen if Google sends us back a success value of false? Yeah, we'll set OK equal to false. What else do we need to do? Like, what do we do above whenever OK is false? Yeah, we should print a message to the user. So let's print a message saying that the CAPTCHA code is no good, and we'll set OK equal to false. If CAPTCHA Success field comes back as true. Lines 52 and 53 are skipped. The CAPTCHA is good, so we can go ahead and save our new user. So let's try this out. I want you to reload your form. Don't check the CAPTCHA code. Fill out the form, but leave the reCAPTCHA blank. And let's see if we get a false response back. So I'm going to go back to register. So when I submit, I get my "Are you human?" message. So the API kicked back a false response. If I go back, and this time I check my box, okay, well, something's not quite right because we got "Are you human?" again. So let's see. Actually, you know what? We'll do this as well. Just for now, we'll also try to print out the error codes and see if we get anything in here. We're almost done, folks. Little patience, please. I'll just check the documentation and see. I didn't think we were missing anything, but did anybody get theirs to work, or everybody gets the error? I'm just going to try on the web server and see if it behaves any differently for me.
I think if put single quotes around false, that's a string.
Okay. That's a great suggestion. Let's try that as I upload it. When I say I'm not a robot, you're right. Thank you for that. Good catch, Kayla. So false. So this is a string. It doesn't get evaluated as a Boolean, where because we're converting the array as a string to a string. Matt, do you have it working a different way?
Yeah, it works without quotation.
Worked without the quotations. Okay, interesting. Didn't for me on my local host. So I had to put the quotes around the false. Interesting. Yours worked. So any application that we build where we have a public page with an input form, we probably should be using this library and this chunk of code so that our forms don't get filled up with junk, because they can, they do, and they will. Does anybody have any questions about the code that we've written? I know it was quite a bit of code to write all at one time, but we really had to write the whole thing in order to be able to do anything with it. We couldn't kind of do it in pieces. Is there anything here that doesn't make sense or not isn't clear?
What does it mean, 36?
36? We're setting what type of request we're making, because the API says it's not enough to just call the URL. The method has to be post, can't be get. So we're just specifying our method as post, okay, by saying curl option, that the post option is set to true. If I set this to false, I'm going to set it to false and watch what happens now when I set it to false. So I'll go back. I'll try and register again. I'll fill it out. So this should work, right? I've done everything correct. Okay, I guess that step was optional. It said post, but even without that, it still worked. So I guess that line we don't have to have. I thought we did. If I change my key, let's say I take out or put in a character at the beginning, now I should get a false.
I added the single quotes around it, and it inversed the function on the check thing. So when it wasn't checked, it was true, and when it was checked, it was false.
Okay, well, let's.
I think I copied it word for word.
Let's see. So I'll leave it. Yeah, when it's unchecked. Oh, wait. Well, just a sec. I should put my. Yeah, that's odd. When I broke my key, I shouldn't be getting that message. If I put in an invalid key, it should always say false. Try a few other things here. So we're still missing something here because now when I put in my quotes, it's always actually, rather than evaluating it this way, we probably should evaluate, you know what, I may not be getting any response. We probably should say if it's not equal to true. I'm not sure this will totally fix the problem, but if we don't get anything back, the code won't go in there if we're checking for false. We probably should be checking that it isn't true. See if that makes a difference. Okay, so there I left it out, and I got "Are you human?" Now when I check it, something's still not quite right with it. I'm going to see if it behaves any differently on the web server. It seems to work when I'm not on localhost. It does work without the quotes. So I have it not equal to true. It wasn't running on my local host. So if I leave CAPTCHA unchecked and register, I get this. If I fill out my CAPTCHA, now it tells me my account's successful and I should be able to log in. Okay, so that was the key. So we need to say if it's not true. So unless we get a true back, it's an error. Sorry? Okay. Well, yeah, because if for some reason we get no response back, it's going to let OK will never get toggled to false, and then they can sign up. So if we get no response back, unless we get a true response back, we're going to go into that block.
Okay, so like if for some reason
the API never returns, like it hangs and Google never gives us a response back. So this object, this result is empty. So we have nothing to evaluate. In that case, if we have nothing to evaluate, we're going to say nope, no good. I will put the code from today onto GitHub so you have it. Okay, so we've done super simple weather API, a more complicated Google API. I'm going to give you your lab now, and then that will be it for today, and you are free to go, okay? The lab won't take you long, but you don't have to stay and do it. You have until Wednesday night, but the lab's only going to take you 5 minutes. So what I want you to do for the lab, which is now available in the assignments, is I want you to add, and I'll show you what it will look like at the end in a minute. This time we're going to use the Facebook API. Actually, we'll change this. You don't have to create a new page. I want this page just to go on the bottom of your games page. Okay. So down below your list of games here, what I want is you to implement the Facebook Comments API. So it will look something like this. Oh, I don't know why I don't have it here. So what I want is the Facebook comments thread to appear above the header, but below the list of video games. I'll change this. So you need to look up the Facebook comments API online, read the documentation, and then in their documentation, they use this as the URL. You need to replace this. I'll just download this file right now. Hang on. So add it to the bottom. The games.php page. You have to take the URL to your games page when you're getting the code from Facebook. One of the things it wants to know is what's the URL of your page that you're going to make comments on. So you need to take the URL from your games page. So I'll need to grab this URL, go to Facebook, look up how to generate the comment box, include my URL, and much like with our little weather widget, there'll be a button there that says get code. There's a couple of sections of code you will need to paste into your games.php page. So when it's done, there will be a little Facebook comment thread here, and I can make a comment on your games page with my Facebook account. So to submit your lab, you just need to give me a link to your login page and give me a username and password. So I can log in, then I go to your games page and I'm going to make a comment using my Facebook account. I'll make a comment on your page and it should show up immediately below. That's it. So you give me a link and give me a login to your site. Okay, and you have until Wednesday night, but it will only take you a few minutes to do. So you may want to do it now. You don't have to submit your code to me because I'll be able to see your code online. All I need is a link to your login page and include a username and password. I will update the lab instructions right now.